the dollar has been the world's primary currency for many years, and it still remains so. This has given the American economy the power to be the leading superpower in the world, as all countries, companies, and investors prefer the dollar over any other currency. However, at this moment, other countries in the world want to challenge this leadership, and the main rival is China. To achieve this, the Chinese government has formed an alliance with other countries, and they aim to create a currency that is so powerful that it could dethrone the dollar as the world's primary currency. In today's video, we will explore what this alliance is about and what impact this new currency could have. The American dollar became the world's primary currency after World War II, when most countries in the world signed the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. This agreement determined that the dollar would be the reserve currency. What is a reserve currency, and why is it so important? Countries, like individuals, save money and keep it in their banks, which is the government's bank. They call this savings reserve and can choose to hold it in a currency such as the dollar or the euro, or in precious metals such as gold or silver. This reserve is important because, among other things, it strengthens the country's own currency. Let's say a country prints 100 billion of its own currency. If that country wants its currency not to lose value, it must purchase an equivalent value of what it prints in gold or dollars. In this way, each printed note would have its backing in dollars, making that currency reliable. After World War II, the dollar was the strongest currency in the world because for every printed dollar, there was an equivalent amount of gold stored in the Federal Reserve's reserves, which is the central bank of the United States. That's why the world adopted the dollar as the reserve currency. The dollar became the most widely used currency in international trade precisely because it was the most reliable currency of all. Today, the United States no longer has all its dollars backed by gold as it did in those years after World War II. This is because the system of backing dollars with gold ceased to function on August 15, 1971, by the decision of the then President of the United States, Richard Nixon. The country was experiencing an economic crisis, and the Nixon administration needed to print money to deliver it to banks so that they could lend money to people, for them to consume more and businesses to produce more, in an attempt to improve the economy again. So, as there was not enough gold to print more notes, they had to abandon the system of backing dollars with gold. However, despite this, the dollar continued to be the strongest currency in the world. The fact that the United States economy is the largest in the world, combined with the fact that it is a very strong democracy, which makes it less likely for a dictator to take over, ensures that the dollar remains the reserve currency and the most widely used currency in international trade today. This graph shows the percentage of reserves that countries hold in dollars, and despite the decline in recent years, nearly 60% of global reserves are held in this currency. But now there is a group of countries that threatens to take away the United States leadership and wants to launch its own currency to challenge the dollar. What are these countries willing to compete with the United States, and what is this new currency? Well, they are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which form a group called BRICS, an acronym created from the initials of each country's name. Recently, this group of countries announced that they are working on the creation of a new currency. The purpose of this currency is precisely to avoid the need to hold dollars and other Western currencies such as the euro or the British pound in their reserves. If a country has its reserves in dollars and the dollar loses value due to inflation, that country's reserves will also lose value. But that's not the only problem. Since all countries use the dollar and the US economy is the largest in the world, when the United States starts to have problems with its economy, everyone else starts to have problems too. Moreover, investors still see the dollar as the strongest currency today. This means that when the world enters a crisis, investors decide to sell all their investments, such as stocks, and convert all their money into dollars, leading to the depreciation of all other currencies. In other words, even if the United States faces a crisis, the dollar remains the chosen currency for investors to safeguard the value of their money. At the end of 2021, global stock markets began to fall because investors saw that inflation in the United States was starting to rise, and that could generate a crisis in the country. Additionally, in early 2022, the war between Russia and Ukraine broke out, which generated more fear among investors. This caused investors from around the world to start selling their investments and take refuge in the dollar. For this purpose, investors worldwide began exchanging their local currencies, such as the euro, for dollars, causing the dollar to appreciate against most world currencies. This graph shows the dollar index, which is an indicator that measures the strength of the dollar against all other world currencies. Between late 2021 and May 2022, the dollar index begins to soar, indicating that the value of all other currencies has declined. Therefore, the BRICS countries believe that moving away from the dollar would help them reduce the impact of global economic crises, because if they can have a currency stronger than the dollar, their currency would not lose value like the rest of the world's currencies. It would also help them mitigate the effects of American inflation, which could provide more stability to the value of their reserves. Additionally, the creation of their own currency for the BRICS countries would not only have a tremendous economic impact, as their currency would be the strongest in the world, but it would also facilitate trade relations between the countries, allowing them to trade with each other without the need to rely on the dollar. But in addition to the joint currency creation project, several of the BRICS countries are already working to reduce their dependence on the dollar and gradually diminish the power of this currency. Last month, China and Brazil signed a trade agreement to get rid of the dollar. This means that they will no longer need to use the dollar for trading between them, but instead will use their own currencies. As part of this agreement, Brazilian entrepreneurs will receive payments from Chinese entrepreneurs in yuan, and Chinese entrepreneurs will receive payments in reais from Brazilian entrepreneurs. This agreement is not the only one that China has made, as it is part of a long-term plan by the Chinese government to establish its own currency, the yuan, as the dominant currency in the world. Another example is Saudi Arabia, which in 2022 started negotiating an agreement with China to accept yuan instead of dollars for oil barrel sales. Furthermore, Russia has also been seeking alternatives to the dollar. Russia and Iran recently started studying the creation of a digital currency for foreign trade. A digital currency, also known as a central bank digital currency, CBDC, is a currency that, instead of being printed on paper like any other, is created on a network similar to the internet called blockchain. And unlike the money you have in your bank account, this money cannot be exchanged for physical cash but is 100% digital. Another sign that Russia and China are trying to move away from using the dollar is that, according to a Bloomberg report, the Chinese yuan has replaced the dollar as the most used currency on the Moscow Stock Exchange. Additionally, when the war between Russia and Ukraine broke out, Russia announced that it would use the Chinese yuan as one of its reserve currencies. As of today, 20% of the Russian central bank's reserves are held in yuan. But going back to the BRICS countries, what would their new currency be like, and how could it impact the dollar? There is currently a limitation to creating their own currency, and that is that the BRICS nations do not have a formal trade agreement that allows them to create their currency. Despite their agreement to reach such an agreement, there is still no written document signed by all countries. For several countries to share the same currency, there must be an agreement among the countries signed with the goal of having a common currency. The most important example of this is the Eurozone. The countries in the Eurozone, including Spain, Germany, France, among others, signed an agreement to create the currency we know today as the euro. However, creating this currency was not something that happened overnight. The agreement that created the euro was signed in December 1991, but it was only recently, in 2002, that the notes and coins that countries use today were put into circulation. So the question is, if this currency is created among the BRICS countries, what utility would it have today? It will likely be used only in very large transactions initially, such as between governments, like a loan that one country grants to another. But if these countries eventually manage to have their own currency, like the euro, it could become a truly powerful currency. Currently, the GDP of the United States, which is the total amount of money a country generates or produces or consumes in goods and services, represents 24% of the entire global GDP. This represents a significant portion of global trade in dollars. In fact, the US dollar is used in almost 90% of all international transactions. But if the BRICS nations united, their GDP would already be equal to that of the United States, with Brazil at 2.1%, Russia at 1.94%, India at 3.28%, China at 16.34%, and South Africa at 0.4%, totaling just over 24%. So, how much could this currency affect the strength of the American dollar, and how could it impact an average person? Well, to see the potential impact, we can look at the case of the euro, which has been used by many European countries for over 20 years. When the euro was created, it wasn't considered a strong contender against the dollar. However, reality showed that while it didn't replace the dollar, it did erode some of its dominance. This graph shows the percentage of global reserves held in different currencies, with the dark blue line representing the dollar and the light blue line representing the euro. As the euro grew as a reserve currency, the dollar declined. European countries used the euro for all their trade within the eurozone and even with some countries outside the eurozone. However, the reason the euro never managed to surpass the dollar is that the combined GDP of the eurozone countries never exceeded even China's GDP in recent years. This graph shows the percentage of Europe's GDP within the global GDP, which did not surpass 16% between 2017 and 2022, and estimates indicate that this percentage would continue to decrease in the coming years. But if the BRICS countries sign a formal agreement similar to the European Union to create an alliance, the situation would be different because their combined GDP, mainly thanks to China, would equal that of the United States. In terms of the impact on individuals, all inhabitants of these countries would have to exchange their local currencies for the new currency, and businesses would have to adapt their prices to these new currencies. Additionally, traveling between these countries would be much easier as there would be no need to exchange different currencies. Even transferring money between businesses in different countries would be easier since no currency would need to be exchanged for dollars or any other currency. However, the creation of a joint currency would take many years. The countries would need to negotiate the agreement, sign it, and then begin planning the implementation of their own currency. As we saw with the euro, this process can take a long time. This means that the supremacy of the dollar in the short term is assured, although the Chinese continue with their plans to challenge its dominance. One of the ways China intends to reduce the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency is through the digital yuan. Over 114 countries around the world are exploring the implementation of digital currencies, with 60 of them already in advanced stages of research. Russia planned to launch its own digital currency, the digital ruble, on April 1, 2023. However, the plans for testing the digital ruble have been indefinitely delayed as there is a need for laws to regulate its functioning, and those laws have not been approved yet. In addition to each country testing its own digital currencies, the idea is for the BRICS countries to share the same currency. Considering the time it takes to create their own currency, the Chinese could attempt to make the digital yuan the common currency among the BRICS countries, as it has already been launched. It is believed that the launch of the digital yuan could be the way China makes the yuan a more powerful currency than the dollar. However, besides this speculation, it hasn't been announced which currency would become the common currency of the BRICS. It could be the Chinese yuan, the Russian ruble, the Indian rupee, or a new currency. But according to statements from some important authorities in the BRICS countries, it seems clear that it will be a digital currency rather than a traditional one. Are there other nations considering doing the same? Can we see other countries in the world joining the BRICS nations? Currently, there aren't many countries strong enough to have currencies that could replace the dollar. However, if the BRICS countries successfully create their own currency, it's possible that other countries may want to join. Since the dollar is currently the most widely accepted currency in the world, ceasing to use it could pose challenges for trade between countries. For example, if a country decides to replace the dollar with the currency created by the BRICS, it may face difficulties finding other countries to buy and sell products. If, for instance, a country needs to purchase a specific product that is only manufactured by U.S. producers, and that country has replaced all its reserves with the currency of the BRICS, it would have no means to negotiate with the United States. There is undoubtedly an economic war between the United States and China for global leadership. Currently, the United States is superior due to its larger GDP and the widespread use and acceptance of the dollar. This is why China continues to seek allies and agreements that would enable it to challenge this leadership. The BRICS appear to be the key that China needs to end the reign of the dollar, but the time it takes to develop their own currency may not be what China desires. So, who do you think will win this war?